I'm part of a group focused on outdoor activities like hiking, snowboarding, and mountain climbing. What started as a Facebook group evolved into a close-knit group of about 10 people. Not everyone joins every outing, but once, 4 of us, Vito, James, Christina, and I, organized a trip to Adirondack Park to climb one of its many mountain trails. We brought sleeping bags and 2 tents since James and I, being the only guys, carried the extra weight. We went in October to experience the beautiful fall foliage. The weather was perfect, but as it got dark, we had to set up camp before it became too dark to continue. We set up camp on a hard, rocky surface and started collecting wood for a fire. James used lighter fluid to get the fire going, and we sat around eating and reminiscing about previous trips. Then it happened. A distant scream, a woman's scream, echoed down the mountain. We froze. Food stopped in our mouths. The scream didn't repeat, but then we heard a loud popping sound, high-pitched and single. We agreed to put out the fire and get into our tents, not wanting to advertise our presence. I shared a tent with James while the girls shared the other. Falling asleep in a sleeping bag is always tough for me, and the scream made it even harder. An hour or 2 passed, and while James slept, I rolled around, uncomfortable. Then another scream, higher pitched and much closer, pierced the night. I sat up and saw James had woken up too. The scream was almost right outside our campsite. We debated waking the girls and leaving, but were unsure about hiking back in the dark. Footsteps outside our tents stopped our discussion. I called out to DeVito and Christina, expecting it to be them, but they didn't answer. The footsteps stopped right outside, and then someone started shaking our tent violently. James and I screamed, and the girls screamed in reaction. I decided we should leave the tent and face whoever was out there. The shaking stopped on the count of 2, and by 3, I unzipped the tent. We crawled out, but no one was there, probably watching us from the darkness. We ran to the girls' tent, telling them we needed to go. They grabbed their backpacks and followed us. Seeing them with their backpacks, we went back for hours despite the danger. We navigated down the mountain in the dark, relying on moonlight, and had to stop multiple times to rest. Paranoia that we were being followed kept us moving until we made it back to the car. James drove us 20 minutes down the road before stopping, and we slept in the car. We woke past noon, exhausted from the long walk. And late night, we told the whole group about it the next day. To our knowledge, nothing came up in the news about murders or strange happenings in the Adirondacks around that time. This incident from October 2017 remains the scariest and worst night of my life. My uncle is notorious in our family for being a daredevil, always worrying my mom, other uncles, and grandma, especially considering he's been on multiple medications for decades. He's what you'd call an adrenaline junkie, having climbed over 5 mountains in his life, most notably Everest, which he attempted but didn't make it to the top. Something in his living on the edge personality slightly changed after his Everest attempt. I was just 10 years old when he did, and even I remember the change. It wasn't until 5 years later that I was told just what happened on Everest. My uncle went alone on his expedition, which may have been his biggest mistake. He stayed at base camp for a full day before continuing his climb beyond that point. At first, the climb was easy, but as expected, it got gradually more difficult, even though it's a well-known fact that many bodies of previous climbers are still on the mountain. My uncle never expected to actually find one. He entered the death zone, the area of the mountain above 8,000 meters where the high altitude results in a lack of available oxygen for humans to breathe. Most of the 200-plus climbers who have died on Everest have died in the death zone. People are advised not to stay in the death zone for more than 16 to 20 hours. While in this zone, my uncle saw his first dead body lodged in a ravine. Being the happy, bubbly person he is, it was a shock and truly disturbing to him. His mood changed from feeling alive and on top of the world to feeling in over his head and mortal. Nevertheless, he progressed onward. When he was tired, he took a break and sat down. Seeing the corpse really messed with his head, and he mentioned that he was also starting to feel dizzy and lightheaded, likely due to the high altitude. My uncle didn't want to get up from his position. He felt like he was losing energy and began talking to himself. After an hour, my uncle finally got up and decided he didn't have it in him to make it to the top. He started to make his way down until another climber bumped into him and urged him to continue up the mountain. My uncle told the man he was not up for it and was going to make his way back down to base camp. He recounts that as the man spoke back to him, urging him to continue up the mountain, his voice was very echoey and surreal. My uncle said take care to the man and continued back down, with his head spinning and feeling short of breath. Every time he looked up, the man was behind him, smiling and making hand motions for my uncle to come back up. My uncle thought smiling and ignoring it would be the best way to get him to leave him alone. After continuously looking back at the man following him, my uncle finally stopped and started firmly telling the man he wasn't feeling well and just wanted to get back to base camp. The man, slightly above my uncle, smiled once more and said, "Watch me go over the ledge." Then he walked to the edge of the snow and leaped down, disappearing over the edge. My uncle said that as he saw this, it snapped him out of his daze, and he ran over to the edge to look down. But there was nobody to be seen sliding down the edge of the mountain. No marks in the snow. He didn't even hear the sound of him sliding down the snow initially or anything. Witnessing this made my uncle hurry down the mountain even faster until the next thing he remembered was darkness, then waking up at the base camp medical clinic in a bed. He had passed out, and a couple of passersby found him and carried him down low enough for a rescue helicopter to reach them. My uncle waited until the end of the story to tell me that he was off his meds for the entire trip. Combined with the lack of air in the death zone, he quickly started to hallucinate and talk to himself. Upon getting home, he did some research on recent deaths on the mountain and learned of a young man who had died climbing Everest that same week who looked just like the man in the hallucination. This is when he started to question if it was actually a hallucination or not. However, the death was reported before my uncle had this alleged hallucination. He still says he's not entirely sure what he saw was a hallucination. I don't press him for more details about the story, as it's clearly left some kind of mental scar on him. I can't imagine how horrific of an experience this was for him.